Hi there, welcome back. Well, what have we got here? We have a completed restoration job. Yes, I know I did jump the gun somewhat. I just got a bit carried away. I lost a little bit of footage and then I thought, what the hell? Let me go ahead, finish it up and then tell you what I've done. I did mention in the beginning this was not a tutorial type video, so I'm not feeling too guilty about not going through all the steps. That you can go and see Xraytonyb B's videos. It's a beautiful series, 5 videos if I'm not mistaken, where he goes into incredible amount of detail on restoring this exact receiver. Brilliant job. You should go and see it. As I mentioned in closing off the last video, I still had not started on the radio sections, and this was actually interesting because what I had was I had a pretty weak AM reception and then I had a very strange FM reception. The FM was sort of cutting in and out, and I think it had to do with possibly capacitors, and I'll show you what I've changed here. Possibly some of the alignment, which I did do, and now that is a challenge, especially the way I did it. I'll describe it briefly. But the result is it's now working perfectly and the reception is incredible. I will tune through this and show you just in a little while. But first of all, what did I do with this radio board, with the RF board? Well, the one thing I didn't do is I didn't do a full recap, and there's a reason for that. I did change the capacitors that have to do with supply filtering. There's one there, one there, one there. There are a few others. They look a lot smaller than the originals. There's another one. I can't see them all now, but they were replaced with very, very good quality Nichicon caps. And some of the others, like these orange ones, I tested them. I tested all the caps on here, but I did not replace them. And the reason is that these caps are in tuned circuits. And quite frankly, I don't have the equipment that I would need to do a complete from scratch alignment on this thing, especially if the multiplex gets put out of joint. And I didn't want to risk it because, again, as I've said before, and I'll repeat it, I don't want to do more damage than good. And you need some pretty hefty equipment. Tony's got that equipment. I don't. I never need it. So I decided to leave well enough alone. I tested all the caps. The caps I've left in are fine. The ones I actually replaced were also fine, but I do know that because they're in the supply filtering, various levels of supply on here, that by changing them, if they were slightly different, the new ones might be better than the other ones, obviously. It wouldn't make any difference to the tuning of this whole setup. But I had to do more than that. I had to try and align it. Now this thing is interesting. The alignment on this is very interesting. First of all, the AM alignment. Well, that is really simple, and it was really quite easy to do because all you need to do is to have a normal signal generator that goes up to, what is it, I think the highest one you have to adjust on is 1.6 megahertz with modulation on there, AM modulation, so mine does that perfectly well. And then the only things you need to adjust are these two guys here, which are pretty accessible, and a few of them here. As I said, I'm not going into all the details, but that was fairly easy to do. And this allowed me to correct the dial accuracy, which was a little bit off, actually quite a bit off. The dial accuracy now is very, very accurate, which is great. All right, not essential, but it was great. But that was sort of a secondary thing. The FM is what I was worried about, really worried about. And the FM is a challenge because you need to send signals between 90, I think it's 90 megahertz and 106 megahertz, and at one point you send 98. So you need to be able to generate a 90 megahertz signal, a 98 megahertz signal, and a 106 megahertz signal. You need to have a signal FM modulated on that. So in effect, you need a high frequency signal generator, which I don't have. Mine goes up to 20 megahertz. Now that's fine for aligning anything, including the IF, which is 10.7 on here as well. But the way they do it is different. They actually get you to send a signal at 98, which is the center of the dial, remember? 88, 98, 108, right? So 98's in the middle. And you adjust a couple of things here. And I'm not going to show you because I don't want you to follow my instructions. That would be dangerous. You do this at your own risk. You could really mess this up if you don't know what you're doing. You align that, and then you align the two ends of the scale, the 90 and the 106. Now, to get a signal going there, what I had to do again was this guy. This is one of those little FM transmitters that you use in your car, and you can adjust it. You know, you can adjust it all the way up to 106, as I mentioned, 98, 106, 90, and everything else that you need you can get from here. Now this transmits a stereo FM signal, and the way that I get the modulation on there is I connect this to my iPad where I've got a signal generator app, and that goes out of the audio, and this thing transmits that audio. In other words, the signal that I'm producing on the signal generator, which in my case was an audible tone of 400 Hertz or 600 Hertz or 1 kilohertz. That gets transmitted in stereo at the frequency that I have set here, which is in megahertz. So when I needed a signal at 90 megahertz, I simply went down to 90 megahertz. And I would send the signal. But there's a problem, right? So if this thing was plugged into my app, and if my app was producing a 600 Hertz tone, I'm transmitting a 600 Hertz tone at 90 megahertz. What they tell you to do is to make it a very weak signal. In fact, they actually stipulate the dB level of that signal, which I can't do with this. And the one thing you want to avoid, really, is to avoid the radio detecting it as stereo, because in the first section of all the testing and all the adjustments, you are just doing the normal FM. You're not playing with multiplex. You're not playing with stereo. You're not worried about the pilot tone of 19 kilohertz. You're just worried about the signal is going to come in the front end, go through, and come out as a 10.7 megahertz IF frequency with obviously the multiplex packages superimposed on that. So the way to do that, the way to attenuate this, is to put it far away. So I set this up, and I got the signals on the scope, and I could see that this stereo light was clicking on and off, which tells me the multiplex was working. So I kept putting this as far away as I needed to so that the stereo light went off. So I knew then that this the signal was not actually triggering the detector, the carrier, the pilot signal. So it basically worked. It allowed me to adjust the dials and adjust the tuning, and there are quite a few things you need to do here. You do the one set at 90 megahertz where you align the oscillator and then the RF circuits. It's all pretty clear in the instructions and also in Tony's video. And then you do it at 106 megahertz and you align there you do the oscillator again. It's a different one. It's a coil now instead of the pads. So you do the alignments on the top end and the middle end, the top end and the bottom end. And then in the middle, you do some alignments as well, which is basically an IF alignment. And then the things like the meter, getting the meter set up properly and getting the tuning indicator correct. Everything that I needed to do. In fact, everything that Xraytonyb did on video number 4 with an HP8646A, I think it is, I did with this thing. Now, the only thing that I couldn't do is to quantify. In other words, I couldn't actually set the meter calibration, because there you need to know exactly how many dBs you're pumping into the antenna at the back there. And in my case, I'm pumping in whatever this thing's sending from, I think it was on top of the washing machine, facing the wall in the kitchen, and I'm, 12, 15 meters away. It's just a question of walking backwards and forwards. And believe me, when you need to change this from 90 to 106 and back to 90, back to 106, and you do that 6 or 7 times, you wear a hole in your corridors. But it worked, and I could do everything except the meter calibration, which is not that important anyway. I believe this thing was pretty well calibrated anyway. So what happened when that got done? Well, mysteriously, all the FM problems disappeared. It came back, it's sharp, it's very, very sensitive, a lot more sensitive. I know we all say this, but I noticed that it was a lot more sensitive than before I did the alignment. It works very well with the mute on. So the mute circuit, when the mute circuit's on, it only triggers when a stronger signal comes through. So you don't have all the hiss in between stations. It pops like crazy. It's fantastic. I love it. I'm almost sorry this thing is over. Actually, I shouldn't say that, but I don't want anything to go wrong. But this was a real pleasure to work on. And actually getting this little thing, which cost about $8, I think it was, $7, to do what an HP 8646A does was in itself a hell of a nice challenge. I like those challenges. That is not to say that if you got a spare 8646 and you want to throw it away, you can give me a call, but I still find it amazing that you can do it with this. But there were a few other things. Let me show you. The dye lamps on this thing were iffy. I believe it was 2 of them that were dead. And I had to make a choice. I had to make a decision. One option would have been to, this looks very dim, but it's not that dim, believe me. This is just because of the camera. One choice would have been to convert this whole thing to LEDs, in which case I could have used these LEDs here, these big ones. And I would have had to, sand or roughen the edges so that this would diffuse the light a lot better. But they're the right size, okay? And the way to do that, if I use these LEDs, this thing, when it's on, I would need to draw about 20 milliamps, and it drops to, I think the voltage is about 2.5 volts or something. So what I'd need to do is I'd need to convert all this. These are in parallel, so I would need to change the source over there. You see the 8 volts, 7.58 volts comes on here. This is an AC voltage. It's from an independent winding in the transformer. It is not rectified, so these lamps are basically illuminating on 8 volts AC. Now the way to do that is you put a resistance series here, you put a diode across one way, and basically the now rectified, unfiltered, but rectified voltage goes to your LEDs in parallel. The way you do that is you take 8 volts, thereabouts, minus about 2 volts, so you 6 volts drop. You make sure that that resistor that you put in series then allows about 2, 4, 6, 8, 80 milliamps through for a 6 volt drop, and I think you know how to do that. I didn't want to do that, and I'll tell you why. The lamps we had on here were, and these are original. I believe they're original. They're the wedge type, and they have on here 8 volts, 0.3 amps, 300 milliamps. Now, I couldn't find 8 volt lamps. What I found were 12 volt lamps, 3 watts. And what happens here is when I put a 12 volt lamp in here, it is drawing 180 milliamps. So this thing was drawing 4 times 300 milliamps. And I measured it. I measured with the power supply. It was actually drawing 300 milliamps, which I found pretty high. I actually thought these lamps were supposed to be lower, but they were all here, and one of them was burnt out. So this thing is drawing just over half the current that the others were drawing. These lamps are easily available. They are easily removable. You just unscrew here, boom, and they pop out. It's a wedge type lamp, and they pop out. You come here, you put it back. So there's no challenge to replace these things. It's not as if they've run obtanium and you can't replace them. These are very easy to replace, so I decided to leave them like that. There was one LED, one of those wheat lights burnt in the speaker, one of the speaker indicators. That I replaced with an LED. I actually used an orange LED so that the glow coming through is similar to the others. But again, all these are fine, and they're pretty easy to replace if you have to. It's not a major job. So I figured leave this thing as original as possible. I mean, this thing is such a beauty as it is, and so much is in its original state. It would be a crying shame to change things just because convention says you do. There is no need to replace these things with LEDs. There is no need, unless you can find them. And hey, if you need to, you can always do them in the future. So I didn't, all right? So that brings us to, where are we? Done all that, brings us to the front panel. Everything was in pretty perfect condition. There are a couple of scratches on the top, nothing too dramatic. Here, there's nothing damaged, absolutely nothing damaged. This on-off switch was very, very tight, very stiff, and I had to really do a lot of work to get it smooth again, and it was slightly bent, but I was able to bend that back. And then the rest was just a question of cleaning everything up, washing it with very carefully so you don't remove any of the labeling. You've got to be very, very careful. Washing all that, washing all the knobs with a toothbrush and everything else, and then cleaning it properly, drying it properly, and putting it back in. And our faceplate, if you look at this thing, it looks absolutely new. I mean, it's amazing. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I mean, look at this guy. Every time I look at this, I think, geez, I wish it was mine. 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 But no, this is probably the only one in Madeira, and it'll probably continue to be the only one in Madeira, because as much as my wife is tolerant of my my crazes, I don't think she'd want a couple of these in the house. Because you know what happens, you get one, then you need another one, and you need another one, and so on and so forth. It's bad enough with tube radios. If I started on these big tuners, I would need to move.
Mindent, amit rám bíznak, azt megoldjuk, függetlenül attól, hogy mennyire nemes feladat. Todos. Supone un gran avance, como explica Su Majestad Felipe VI, presidente de honor de la Fundación Ortega Marañón.
Inferiores de España, pues han sido siempre las primeras. Muchos títulos y han sido sin ninguna duda la élite mundial que hace no muchos años a ganar, como decíamos, 2 Eurocopas y un Mundial en la absoluta, ¿no? Desde el trabajo de abajo de luego el gran trabajo que se ha hecho en las exteriores. Luis de la Fuente, que otra vez en la Eurocopa la próxima primavera, bueno, sensación de, como te decía, trabajo bien hecho, contento por muchas cosas, especialmente porque ya sé que el comportamiento de los chavales, que los tienes poco tiempo como el resto de selecciones y que son muchas veces nuevos, ¿no? Es el trabajo quizá más...
Nombre y su circunstancia, hemos querido recuperar su voz. Tenemos suerte de tener...
Eso es difícil. Que los nombres y tengan un poco... Es el trabajo más complicado. Bueno, un día... Entendido.
Como necesario un repertorio de acciones que... Otra consagración.
Además, no hay músculo de gestión.
Limpa Ruben Dias com a ajuda de Rafael Guerreiro. 20 minutos e meio.
No termina de creérselas por venir de donde vienen.
Los datos de Madrid. Ponga su vehemencia y su ímpetu en combatir al...
Ficar com a ideia, ou fiquei eu com a ideia também, que terá sido quarto.
Otras que eviten los contactos sociales en esta nueva...
La decisión que hemos tomado es darle un toque de queda.
Elas vai isolar-se, vai entrar na grande área, atirou para a chuva!
Ido al 24 horas aquí en la radio pública y voy a empezar por... No sé si es necesario.
¿Qué nos va a ocurrir cuando no haya PCR?
É, de facto, era aquilo que dizia a equipa de Portugal a tentar explorar estas transições rápidas. Há pouco foi Diogo Jota, agora passe fantástico de...
Datos en la Comunidad de Madrid.
Well, that's the reception test, and what can I say? AM, we have, or rather medium wave, we have the band completely full of stations coming in from everywhere. Only one of them up here at 1530, I think it is, kilohertz, is a Madeiran station. The rest are either from the Canary Islands or from North Africa. We heard a few of them in one of the Arab languages, so that's obviously North Africa. And they're coming in very, very well. Some of them, you would swear, are local. They're not. And as regards FM, well, FM, I normally get about 4 stations here where I live. This had the muting function on, which means that all the weak stations are cut out, and as is the hiss between stations. And you saw how many times this thing popped in. If I had a proper antenna, which I don't, I've got a piece of wire just hanging from the bookshelf, I'm sure that some of those that came in would actually come through very, very clearly as well. So this thing's receiving very well. And strangely enough, a lot of those that came through are also from the Canary Islands. Now, if you know the distance from Madeira to the Canary Islands, I think it's 600 kilometers, is it? Which sort of goes against my belief that FM was supposed to be just for shorter distances. But we've got the sea between us, no ships in the way. So, yeah, I guess that's line of sight, hey? A lot of Canary Islands. I actually think a couple of these are from North Africa as well. Yeah, I'm not sure. But the local stations, the main ones I listen to, come through way up there in terms of signal strength. The meter's perfectly aligned. The tuning indicator's perfectly aligned. This thing is working beautifully, and I'm sorry to see it go. But that's it. That's the end of the project. So I want to thank you for sticking around if you have, and I hope you've enjoyed the series. I've certainly enjoyed doing this. It's been a real pleasure working on the set. And if you have enjoyed it, please click like and share the video and subscribe and all that jazz. And if you want to support the channel directly, you can do so on Patreon. Links are at the end of the video. So, once again, thanks for watching. Bye for now and stay safe.